We have seen in this course so far about how carbon capture and storage is a very vital method in reducing global CO2 emissions and tackling the important issue of climate change.
Carbon capture and storage is a technology to help reduce emissions of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Technology to remove carbon dioxide from industrial plants have existed since the 1930s, and we've been pipelining and injecting CO2 in the ground since the 1970s.
I think the first thing they need to know is that fundamentally it's not such a challenging thing to do. We know how to capture CO2, we know how to put it in pipelines, we know how to inject it underground, we know how to monitor, we have models that are reasonably good at predicting where it goes, so that the individual components are basically there today.
However, CCS has not been implemented much on a global scale due to lack of funding and large costs involved. The key costs involved in CCS include capital expenditure to set up the CCS equipment and facilities on site, operating costs throughout the lifetime of the power plant. Energy penalties for CO2 capture are also very significant. The method of storage is also a key determinant of cost. Thus, CCS costs can be very project specific and require massive investment amid high uncertainty in costs involved and potential returns.
So President Obama's looked at this and he seems to think this is legitimate science and it's going to happen. Okay, so what are some of the problems? Well, the simplest one is it's very expensive. So if we are talking about, renewable energy, you have solar, wind, geothermal as being expensive. If you were to introduce the carbon capture and storage technology, that would be much more expensive than any of these other renewable energy options. Number two, there is no evidence that we can get this built at commercial scale. And you said, yes, coal is a massive resource. Oil and coal are basically the same globally in terms of consumption. If there was really an easy way to do carbon capture and storage, it probably would have been done by now. We're talking about an energy infrastructure that is as big as the entire oil infrastructure that we already have. You're talking about something at that level of magnitude. We're not going to get there in 20 years. We're not going to, who knows if we can ever get there. So if we want to talk about things that are realistic, actually the more conservative route is invest in energy, spend $1 trillion on energy efficiency, spend $1 trillion on getting solar widely and cheaply available. So that's what's wrong with carbon capture. Now, of course, the reason why the coal industry likes it is because it keeps coal alive.
So, does this make CCS too expensive to ever become a reality?
The challenges are in the integration, number one. Number two, in terms of the cost of capture and the energy requirements for the capture itself. And three, I think, in terms of public acceptance, that this should be part of the portfolio of options.
Well, it's one of the necessary things that we have to do in order to deal with climate change, because we cannot do without the use of carbon fuels. The world simply doesn't have any way of substituting carbon fuels 100%. CCS will have to become profitable at one point in time or later. In the beginning, in order to launch CCS as a mitigating action, it will need significant public funding. Once the alternative becomes more expensive than investing in CO2 capture, then CO2 capture plants will, of course, become profitable.
How can we make CCS a profitable venture? CO2 can be sold by power plant operators to oil and gas companies for enhanced oil recovery. Cap and trade policies for CO2 emissions can create a market for captured CO2. High government taxes on CO2 emissions will create a financial incentive to capture and store CO2. Studies show that the minimum CO2 price needed to force operators into CCS varies between $35 to $60 per ton of CO2 emission. Government can also provide massive funding grants for CCS on equal priority with renewable energy.
So I'm personally frustrated because I work on a technology, my research lab, CCS, which if we were really serious about dealing with climate issue, we could really be deploying this today.